I'm delighted here to be with Ritchard, not only because he and I are 25-year veterans of the venture capital industry. Before our crowd, did a fund which was fairly formative in the Israeli venture area called Israel Seed. Ritchard Anton got his start with Sir Ronald Cohen at Apex Partners, then went on to Amadeus, which is one of the leading funds here, if not the leading fund in the UK, and now is the general partner of OXX, O-X-X, which is a spectacular new growth-oriented fund for software companies, currently at 100 million, headed to about 150 million, and we at our crowd are very proud LPs of OXX. So full disclosure, it's great to have you here, Ritchard. So we're talking about UK-Israel venture, what's different, what's the same, and Ritchard is interesting because of a number of reasons, but in particular because he invests both in the UK and in Israel. You're on the board still of Forescout?
I came off the board of Forescout just after it went public,
IPO,
actually, but I'm
right.
still close to them. I was on the phone with them yesterday.
Ritchard has a lot of experience with Israeli companies and Israeli investments, as well as UK and now the Nordics as well. And I'm going to ask him, where are you going to put more money to work in OXX? Is it going to be in Israel or in the UK?
So it's a good question. Let me give you a little bit of context. So there's some striking similarities between the UK and Israel. Both countries have a strong affinity to the US. Both countries are very centralized. Both countries have very strong entrepreneurs. But there are also some pretty big differences as well. So Israel, to its credit, has fabulous training in entrepreneurship, very early training in the army, which is a fabulous source of strength. It has very entrepreneur-oriented universities, and it's probably got a very crowded VC ecosystem, which is
Are
an
you
important
going to
point.
put more money into Israel or the UK, or is it too early to tell? And where are you going to make more money?
So I'm hoping that the answer to those two questions is going to be the same thing. So I'll now talk about the UK. I'm really excited about the UK at the moment. So the UK's got pretty developed consumer markets, large capital system. It's the only country outside of the US that has top 10 science universities in the world, and we have 3 of them in the UK. So we have some brilliant technology, but it's really an underfished pond in my business in growth investment. So I'm going to be investing more in the UK now. The two countries are at different stages. They're out of phase in their cycles. I invested a lot in Israel in the early noughties when there were not quite so many venture investors around. And today I find the UK and the Nordic countries sort of more exciting because capital is scarcer.
And in terms of growth, I mean, we hear a lot in Israel about how do we transition from startup nation to scale-up nation. What are the unique challenges facing Israeli companies as they approach this growth phase? And what are you looking for that would actually trigger you to write that check as opposed to, sitting back and taking a pass?
A lot of people kind of pontificate about this, but I think the unique challenges actually they're unique to every company in the world that is not American or Chinese, because there are only 2 equity capital markets in the world that are very supportive to growth-oriented companies, and those are the ones in the US and China. And so people talk about the Israeli problem about not creating more world-scale companies. People in the UK talk about the UK problem. I imagine that people in Hungary probably talk about the Hungarian problem in the same thing, and all countries in the world. And it's all about being able to access growth-oriented public markets. To do that, you've got to succeed in the US. So I would say that the unique challenge for all companies that want to get to that global scale is to access US markets, and in particular US capital markets.
Okay, the topic of this was to keep calm with chutzpah. Obviously, the keep calm part is a UK trait, whereas the chutzpah is an Israeli trait. And the cultural differences, are maybe not as much as Israel and Japan, okay, but are pretty significant. Can you tell me an outrageous story that has happened when you've encountered the chutzpahdik Israeli and the calm Brit meeting in the context of these startups?
So I'll tell you two. So one, on vacation in the States in a self-catering villa, I went to the supermarket, massive supermarket, a bit like the one we saw with Trax, very confusing, and I found the area where there's like a stand of British food and a stand of Israeli and kosher food, and I could get my Marmite and my Yarden aubergine dip together. So cultures kind of quite close together. But then an example of where they're different, again, from the kind of not the business world. There's a restaurant in Golders Green here called Dizengoff. So I went there one day and I walked in and sat down with three friends, and the waitress came along and said, "Would you like a drink?" And my friend said, "Oh, I'll have a Coke or I'll have a glass of white wine." And I said, "I'll have a beer." "Would you like Maccabee or Gold Star?" "I'll have Maccabee." That was to keep calm. "Did you try Gold Star?" Right. Is the response I got from the waitress.
What are different about board meetings of Israeli companies or UK companies? How would you describe that different ambiance or environment?
Chalk and cheese. So I think one of the reasons that often Brits are not so comfortable with Israeli companies is the directness and the Sabra instincts, which kind of come to the fore, I would say, in Israeli company board meetings. However, what I've also found is that the best Israeli companies end up adopting a more kind of American approach, and board meetings do sort of calm down. So it's a sign of maturity when they become more American.
There's that word, calm. So if there's a bunch of Israeli entrepreneurs in the audience and other people here, what should the Israelis be doing and being aware of when they're pitching a UK investor? What's a no-no and what's a hot button, right? In other words, what's the worst thing that an Israeli could do pitching a UK investor?
So talking down to the UK investor, which happens, so kind of coming with an air of arrogance.
Wait, Israelis like pretend they know it all?
Yeah. That can happen. It has been known. Another really good example is just being very dismissive, or we just need 1% of this market, and that's easy to get. So that kind of thing happens.
And what turns on? What will excite and start the British investor to drool a little bit, other than use the word AI?
Yeah, that's another good example of a bad thing, just a keyword-rich BS. However, which happens all the time. However, Israeli technology is prestigious. That's certainly the case in Asia, and it's been the case for many years in the US. It's also the case in the UK, actually. So the kind of brand Israel is associated with obviously lots of negative things in the political environment that we have in Europe, but it's actually very strongly associated in the business community with a lot of positive things, particularly bleeding edge technology that works in the real world. So relating to kind of technological brilliance, which maybe comes from the universities. I myself am involved in with Tel Aviv University. And
you're the chairman of the board of Tel Aviv University here in the UK.
That's right. I chair Tel Aviv University. Thank you. Yeah. I'm a big fan. It's a wonderful institution. Very, very entrepreneurial. And that's where it beats out UK universities, actually, because Tel Aviv University is the only top 10 university in the world for producing entrepreneurs that's not in the UK, that's not in the US, excuse me. So we're ahead of the UK in that sense. But to answer your question, speaking to that technological brilliance that is prestigious is a very strong plus.
So just one last wrap-up question, and we'll move on so that we can catch up here at this schedule. If you had to center your attention on one area where you think that there simply is not enough investment, where you're looking for deal flow, okay, in this broad range. I mean, you do software only, but software today has eaten the world. It's everything. What are you most focused on? I mean, you know, I'm sure a lot of the venture capital types here would love to hear from you after 25 years. What makes you excited today?
I'd change your tense. Software is eating the world, and it's still quite early in its meal. And there are lots and lots and lots of sectors where there are lots and lots of inefficiencies, whether you're talking about SMEs that operate inefficiently, or you're talking about medical processes that are extremely labor-intensive and inefficient, and bringing AI into those areas is going to take a long time, and I'm really interested in lots of opportunities in those verticals.
Ríčard and Anton from Ox Capital, thank you very, very much for being with us.
Thank you, John.